You confuse grief with entitlement, Ethan!
No, I confuse rules with murder.
She said the gate was locked for security reasons. My father was dying 10 feet from it. The clipboard queen stood at the entrance like a statue carved from arrogance. Perfect hair, pressed crimson blazer, and that practiced look of concern that never touched her eyes. She didn't flinch when I told her the paramedics couldn't enter. Didn't blink when I said the dispatcher was looping through my 911 integration feed. Instead, she said, "Rules are rules, Mr. Ward. Unauthorized emergency access voids insurance coverage." The words hit harder than the sirens screaming outside the gate. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sound of my father's voice echoing in my head. Ethan, always trust the system. But I built the system. Ever seen power lose its shield? Hit subscribe. The fall begins now. I'm Ethan Ward, Emergency Communications Engineer. I designed the firmware used in this community's gate access control, the same system that refused the paramedics the night my father collapsed on his porch. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent a decade making systems faster, safer, more responsive. But that night, bureaucracy killed him faster than any heart attack could. When I reached him, the glow from his phone screen lit his face. One missed call. A voicemail that began with, "Help me, son." I called out for her, the enforcer in crimson, who was still arguing with the paramedic captain about authorization codes. She told him to stand down until a board approval message came through. My father's pulse didn't wait for protocol. That porch swing still moves when the wind shifts. It creaks like it remembers. Every time I hear it, I swear it's saying the same thing my father whispered the night before he died. Don't let them silence you. That's when it stopped being grief and became war. You ever watch someone so obsessed with order that they forget compassion? That's who she was. The tyrant in heels who measured her power in fine print. And that night, when she told me, if your father had followed gate policy, he'd still be alive, something inside me snapped. The next morning, I filed the emergency system logs myself. Every denied access code, every ignored override request, recorded. I knew the firmware down to its circuits. The log ID proved that Claudia Mercer, the board chair, had manually disabled the emergency bypass during an HOA security trial. She killed the override that could have saved my father. I didn't go to the police first. I went to the State Tech Commission, because if the officer of rules wanted to hide behind bylaws, I'd bury her under federal infrastructure standards. Still, when I walked past that porch swing again, I realized something else. This wasn't just about my father. Every single house here had a story like ours. People fined for wind chimes, reported for lawn colors, ticketed for family gatherings. But nobody ever challenged her. Nobody wanted to. That's what made her dangerous. The clipboard queen ran this neighborhood like a fortress, and I was the first crack in its walls, and I wanted that crack to widen until sunlight poured through. Where are you watching from tonight? Because if you've ever lost someone to arrogance disguised as authority, this isn't just my story, it's ours. The next morning, her voice echoed through the community intercom before the sun even cleared the rooftops. Residents are reminded that unauthorized system tampering will result in immediate penalties, she announced, her tone dripping with that same self-importance that once made people flinch. The officer of rules didn't mention my father's death, just an incident. That's how she sanitized it. But to me, it wasn't an incident. It was murder by neglect. I stood by the gate, watching maintenance crews reinstall the access keypad I'd built years ago. They moved carefully under her gaze. The enforcer in crimson stood nearby with her clipboard, barking quiet instructions as if replacing screws could erase guilt. When she caught my stare, she gave a faint smirk, that infuriating one that said, "You can't touch me." She was wrong. By noon, the neighborhood's group chat was on fire. Half the residents were whispering condolences. The other half were terrified to speak at all. Fear does strange things. It teaches people to confuse silence with safety. And that was exactly how the board chair ruled, not through law, but through intimidation. I uploaded my father's emergency call timestamps into a secure drive, cross-referencing them with the HOA's internal access logs. Every single one matched my suspicion. The manual override had been disabled 20 minutes before his collapse. That wasn't coincidence. That was intent. Still, I needed confirmation. So I called in a favor from a paramedic friend who'd been on duty that night. When he spoke, his voice was low. "We tried everything, Ethan. She told us if we broke the gate, we'd be charged for property damage." He paused. "We heard your dad's voice. Through the fence." That silence after his words. Unbearable. If you've ever felt the weight of knowing someone's life could have been saved, you understand what it does to your mind. You stop seeing rules as structure. You see them as weapons. Later that evening, I walked past the HOA office. Through the glass, I saw the clipboard queen inside with 2 board members. She was smiling, actually smiling, as she pointed to an envelope stamped with the HOA logo. A condolence letter, no doubt. Her way of keeping optics clean. The irony? She didn't know I'd already traced the data trail back to her personal login. The digital signature of the tyrant in heels. My system. Recorded every action. She might have thought deleting logs made her safe, but firmware doesn't forget. When I left that office window, I noticed someone watching me from across the parking lot. A woman, maybe early 30s, clutching a binder to her chest. She looked nervous, like she wanted to speak but couldn't. I recognized her from past board meetings. Tessa Howard, the HOA secretary. Her eyes flicked toward the office, then to me, and she turned away fast. A conflicted witness, maybe, or just another scared employee. Either way, I'd remember her face. That night, as I sat by my father's porch swing, the air felt heavier than usual. The wood creaked as if the house itself was listening. I replayed his final voicemail, each breath weaker than the last. And somewhere between grief and rage, I made my decision. If the board thought they could bury this under paperwork, I'd make sure the state dug it up again. I stared at the gate across the street, its metal gleaming in the moonlight, the same barrier that decided who lived and who didn't. And as the night grew still, I whispered to the wind, "Tomorrow, Claudia Mercer stops hiding behind rules." When I walked into the HOA office that morning, the air smelled of lemon polish and control. Everything was too neat, too measured. Like grief wasn't allowed to leave fingerprints here. Behind the reception counter sat Claudia Mercer, eyes sharp as glass, her crimson jacket practically screaming authority. She didn't look surprised to see me. "Mr. Ward," she said smoothly, "you can't just barge in here." I met her gaze. "You disabled an emergency override that cost a man's life. You think a door's going to stop me now?" The clipboard queen didn't flinch. "If you're implying negligence, I'd advise against making baseless accusations." Her tone was pure bureaucracy, calm, confident, poisonous. She motioned to the young woman sitting in the corner, Tessa Howard, the HOA secretary. The binder in her lap trembled just slightly, but she kept her eyes low, pretending to type something into her laptop. I saw it in her shoulders, though, the tension, the guilt. She'd seen the logs. She knew. I leaned on the counter. "You told paramedics not to break the gate. You told my father to wait." The enforcer in crimson sighed dramatically, clicking her pen like a gavel. "We have policies, Mr. Ward. You may think you're entitled to defy them because of your technical background, but rules exist for a reason." That word, rules, made my blood boil. "So does accountability." Tessa's fingers froze on the keyboard. For a second, her eyes flicked up, catching mine. Fear, shame, something buried deep beneath compliance. That's when I realized she wasn't loyal to Claudia. She was trapped by her. If you've ever seen someone silently plead for help but can't risk speaking, you know the look. It's small, but it changes everything. I decided to test her. "Funny," I said, keeping my tone casual. "I checked the system firmware this morning. Someone used your admin code 30 minutes before the blackout. Any idea why that might be?" Tessa's breath caught, barely audible. Claudia cut in fast. "Technical details are irrelevant. The HOA board authorizes every system test, and all actions were logged correctly." "The system disagrees," I said, "and unlike your meeting minutes, it doesn't lie." The tyrant in heels stood up slowly, her heels clicking like a metronome of control. "Mr. Ward, if you continue this harassment, I'll have you removed. Your grief doesn't give you immunity from order." "Neither does your title," I replied quietly. That silence afterward was electric. Even the printer in the corner seemed to stop mid-whir. Tessa swallowed hard, pretending to shuffle papers, but her hand trembled again. When I turned to leave, she whispered, barely audible, "Check the audit log. Folder 7B. I didn't react, just nodded once and walked out. But those 3 words changed everything. Outside, the sky looked too calm for what was coming. I pulled out my phone and typed into my secure server, Access Audit Folder 7B, Local Mirror Backup. The log loaded instantly, entries, deletions, timestamps. Every single one linked back to the officer of rules herself. That was it. The proof I needed, but I couldn't use it yet. Not until Tessa was safe. Back at my father's house, I replayed the voicemail again, his voice fading, his last breath breaking mid-sentence. My fist tightened on the porch rail until my knuckles went white. The swing creaked beside me, slow and steady, like a heartbeat waiting for justice. And for the first time since his death, I felt something sharper than grief, clarity. This wasn't about exposure anymore. This was about redemption, for him, for everyone she'd silenced. If you've ever stared down someone who hides behind authority, you know what comes next. The board chair had no idea. She'd just opened the door to her own undoing. By the next HOA meeting, word of my confrontation had already spread like wildfire. People didn't say it out loud, but I saw it in their eyes when I entered the community center, curiosity laced with fear. The board chair sat at the front, flanked by her loyal committee members, posture straight as a blade. Claudia Mercer looked up from her notes and gave that rehearsed, condescending smile I'd come to recognize. "Mr. Ward," she began, her voice carrying across the polished room, "I hope you're here to conduct yourself respectfully this time." Respectfully? She said it like an insult. I took a seat in the back row, watching as she adjusted her crimson blazer, the same one she'd worn the night of my father's death. The enforcer in crimson loved her symbols of control. Every detail about her screamed order, her precise handwriting, her controlled tone, the rhythm of her pen tapping against the clipboard. But control only lasts as long as fear does, and fear was slipping. The agenda on the projector listed Emergency Access Policy Review. She was trying to reframe it, pretending this was all procedural, nothing personal. "We are revisiting gate safety protocols," she said smoothly, "to ensure incidents like last week never happen again." Incidents. Again, she wouldn't say his name. When the discussion opened, I stood. "You mean the incident where you locked out paramedics during a cardiac emergency?" The room froze. Her expression didn't flicker, but her hand tightened around the clipboard. "This meeting is not the place for emotional outbursts," she replied evenly. I took a slow breath. "Emotion doesn't kill people. Deliberate negligence does." A murmur rippled through the residence. The clipboard queen's control was cracking, one whisper at a time. She turned her focus to the others. "As I was saying, procedural revisions will be discussed by qualified board members only." She glanced at me pointedly, her voice sharp as glass. "Mr. Ward is not one of them." That's when I saw it. Tessa, the secretary sitting near the projector, her posture rigid. She avoided my eyes but kept fidgeting with her pen, tapping twice against the desk. A signal. She was nervous. Something was happening behind those screens. I took a step forward. "Then maybe you should explain why your access logs show your personal authorization code used minutes before the gate failure." Gasps filled the room. Claudia froze. The officer of rules glanced toward the IT chair beside her, but he suddenly looked pale. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said finally, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Ward's claims are unverified, and his data is illegally obtained." "That's rich," I said, coming from someone who illegally disabled a federal safety feature. The clipboard queen slammed her pen down. "Enough! You're not an expert in HOA governance." "I'm an engineer," I shot back. "I wrote the emergency access firmware that your committee butchered." The silence afterward was suffocating. That's when Tessa finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "Madam Chair, maybe we should review the audit logs before dismissing his claims." The tyrant in heels turned toward her, expression razor sharp. "Stay in your lane, Ms. Howard." The moment hung heavy in the air. Everyone saw it. The power imbalance. The cruelty wrapped in authority. If you've ever watched truth try to breathe under someone's thumb, you know that feeling. When the meeting adjourned, I caught Tessa's eye as she packed her things. Her hands shook, but she mouthed a single word. "Tonight." That was it. Confirmation. She had something. As I stepped out into the night, the cold air hit like clarity. The porch lights flickered across neat lawns, every house looking identical, like conformity carved in concrete. But for the first time, I wasn't the only one awake. Curtains moved, eyes watched. The cracks in her kingdom had begun to spread. Night settled heavy over Maplewood Crossing, that kind of suburban quiet that hides too much. I parked 2 streets over and walked the rest of the way on foot, my steps slow and deliberate. Every window I passed looked identical. White blinds, warm light, silence. But somewhere behind those walls, someone was ready to talk. Tessa had chosen the one place no one from the board ever stepped foot in, the old maintenance shed behind the tennis courts. When I reached it, the door creaked open just enough to reveal her pale face in the sliver of moonlight. "You came," she whispered. "Wouldn't miss it," I said quietly. Inside, the smell of dust and oil hung thick. She clutched a manila envelope to her chest, glancing over her shoulder like the shadows might snitch. "I shouldn't be doing this," she murmured. "If Claudia finds out—" "She already suspects you," I said. "So let's make it count." Tessa hesitated, then handed me the envelope. "These are copies of the audit reports, real ones. The board chair had the official files rewritten to hide what she did, but the system auto-archives before every edit. I printed the backups." I opened the folder carefully. Inside were timestamps, access records, and the damning line. Emergency override, manual disable, initiated by C. Mercer. There it was, irrefutable proof that the enforcer in crimson had deliberately blocked medical access during my father's emergency. My throat went dry. I stared at Tessa. "Why help me?" She looked down. "Because he didn't deserve to die waiting on a gate code. And because—" Her voice trembled. "I heard him through the speaker that night." The air between us went still. If you've ever heard regret in someone's voice, you know how it sounds, heavy, hollow, final. "I tried to override her command," she continued, "but the clipboard queen locked out all admin access from her console, said it was a security measure. When the paramedics begged for clearance, she told them to follow protocol. My fists clenched so tight I could feel my pulse in my palms. The officer of rules hadn't made a mistake. She'd made a decision." Tessa took a deep breath. "You can't go to the police yet. She has connections. Half the local council owes her favors. But if you can get the governor's task force to review this, it's over." That's when I remembered my father's old friend, Senator Blake, had once promised him a favor after his years in service. "Maybe it's time I cash in a debt," I said quietly. She nodded, eyes wide. "Then move fast. The tyrant in heels is already tightening her grip. She's been reviewing all staff communications. She'll realize soon I printed those logs." I slipped the folder under my jacket and looked her dead in the eyes. "You won't take the fall for this. I'll handle her." Outside, the night had changed. The crickets were silent now, as if the whole neighborhood was listening. When I reached my truck, a single HOA security SUV idled at the intersection. The driver's silhouette sat motionless behind the glass, phone glowing faintly in his hand. He wasn't texting, he was watching, reporting. I pulled away slowly, careful not to draw attention. Back home, I spread the documents across the table, the yellow lamplight turning them almost gold. My father's voice echoed faintly from the old answering machine nearby, his final message still saved, still raw. "Son, don't fight them alone." I exhaled. "I won't." If you've ever stared at evidence that could tear down an empire, you know the mix of fear and focus that follows. This was no longer about revenge. It was justice wrapped in circuitry and signatures. The board chair might have built her kingdom on intimidation, but I was about to bring her rules crashing down with her own ink. By dawn, the quiet suburb didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a chessboard. Every porch light, every camera, every passing SUV belonged to her network. Claudia Mercer ran Maplewood Crossing like a kingdom of silence. And now that I had proof, I could feel the walls closing in. The board chair wasn't just protecting herself anymore, she was hunting. When I stepped outside, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Stop digging, Mr. Ward. Some things are bigger than you." No signature, but I didn't need one. It reeked of her handwriting, precise, unfeeling, and certain. I deleted the message and started the truck. The next step wasn't revenge. It was leverage. I needed someone outside her reach, Someone who'd listen before she buried this. Senator Blake was that man, and if I could get those files to his office, it would start a chain reaction she couldn't control. But the clipboard queen was already tightening the noose. When I turned the corner near the community park, a black sedan blocked my path. 2 HOA security officers stepped out, hands resting casually on their belts. One of them said, "Routine patrol, Mr. Ward. You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I replied. "Maybe you should check on the real threats, like corrupt leadership." They didn't smile. One leaned closer. "You're making this worse for yourself. The board doesn't appreciate defamation." "The board," I said, "will appreciate what's coming." They stepped aside after a long pause, and I drove off, heart steady, not racing. I'd been a combat medic once. Fear was just another heartbeat. When I reached the overlook near the city highway, I parked and called Tessa. Her voice cracked the moment she answered. "They know, Eric. Claudia's been asking about the audit room access. She's pulling footage." The enforcer. In Crimson never wasted time. "Listen," I said, "I have backups of everything. If she corners you, deny knowing me. You're a witness now, and I'll make sure you're protected." There was silence, then a soft sob. "You don't understand? She doesn't just ruin reputations, she destroys people. The officer of rules has friends in law enforcement, in housing commissions, everywhere." I looked down at the folder on the seat beside me, its edges frayed from my grip. "Then we go higher than her." "Higher?" "The governor's task force for emergency infrastructure. They'll see through this fast." A pause. "If you can reach them?" "I will," I said, "but you need to stay put. No calls, no messages. She's watching." The wind whipped through the trees as I hung up, scattering a few loose pages across the dashboard. One landed face up, the report time stamped at 9:07 p.m., the night my father died. Claudia's digital signature burned across the bottom in elegant italics. I snapped a picture and encrypted it, uploading it to my secure drive. Even if they destroyed the paper trail, the evidence would live. Back in town, things were shifting. Neighbors who used to wave now crossed the street. The HOA newsletter in my mailbox had a new headline: "Community under attack by false allegations." The tyrant in heels was rewriting history in real time, but propaganda only works until the truth gets louder. That night, I drafted an email to Senator Blake's aide. Anonymous sender, encrypted attachments, short message. Review immediately. Death tied to HOA negligence. System override logs enclosed. I hovered over the send button for a full minute. Once I pressed it, there was no going back. If you've ever stood on the edge of a storm you started, you know that strange calm before the break. I hit send. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, faint but growing. The clipboard queen might have controlled the rules, but I'd just rewritten the game. The morning after the email went out, Maplewood Crossing felt eerily quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before a storm breaks something open. I didn't know if Senator Blake's team had received my message yet, but one thing was certain. The board chair knew I'd moved. When I stepped outside, 2 HOA-issued flyers were taped to my truck windshield. Notice of non-compliance, unauthorized media contact. It was absurd. She was already trying to frame me for leaking false information. The officer of rules didn't waste a single sunrise before rewriting the narrative. That's when I saw Tessa. She stood near the curb, holding her tote bag too tightly, her knuckles pale. She glanced around before approaching. "She knows about the files," she whispered, eyes darting toward the security cameras on the lampposts. "How bad?" I asked. "She's furious. Claudia called an emergency board meeting this morning. Said someone on staff betrayed community. Confidentiality." The clipboard queen was closing ranks. "She's demanding access to everyone's computers," Tessa continued, her voice trembling. "She told it she'd find the traitor, even if it means locking us all out." Her choice of words, traitor, hit like a knife. The enforcer in Crimson had turned this into a witch hunt. "You did the right thing," I said, steadying her. "You gave me what I needed." Tessa shook her head. "It's not enough. There's something else, something you haven't seen." She hesitated. "The audit reports you got were just surface level, but the internal communication logs, they prove she overrode state emergency protocol manually. That's a felony." I blinked. "Do you have them?" "Not yet." She swallowed hard. They're stored on the HOA's main console, her console. She keeps it locked in the conference room safe. Of course she did. The tyrant in heels trusted no one but herself. Tessa looked at me like she was waiting for permission to keep talking. I can get in tonight. She's holding the meeting at 7. After that, she usually goes to her car to take private calls. I can use that window. I stared at her, calculating the risk. If she catches you, she'll bury you. I know, she said quietly, but I'm already halfway in the grave if I don't. If you've ever seen someone standing at the edge of fear but refusing to step back, you know that look. I nodded. All right, I'll create a distraction, something loud enough to draw her off for a few minutes. How? A grim smile tugged at my lips. By giving her the thing she wants most: control. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I parked outside the HOA office and waited. The windows glowed a sterile white, shadows moving inside, her board of loyal followers pretending this was about community order. At exactly 7, the clipboard queen stepped out front, heels clicking like gunfire against the pavement. She was dressed in crimson again, voice sharp as she barked orders into her phone. No one leaves until every report is cross-checked, and get me the IT logs by 9. I approached, slow but deliberate. Still running damage control, Claudia? She turned, eyes narrowing. You're trespassing, Mr. Ward. This property belongs to the association. So did my father, I said softly. Until your policies killed him. Her jaw tightened. You should watch your words. Defamation can cost you your home. Funny, I said, stepping closer. That's exactly what negligence costs lives. She opened her mouth to respond, but a shrill alarm blared from inside the building. Doors slammed. Chaos erupted. Tessa had done it. The board chair spun around, shouting commands, her voice cutting through the night. Lock the server room, now! But it was too late. When Tessa finally emerged 15 minutes later, her face was pale but resolute. She clutched a flash drive in her trembling hand. It's all here, she whispered. Every message, every override, everything. Behind her, the clipboard queen's shadow fell long across the parking lot, searching for what she'd just lost. The storm had officially broken. The night Tessa handed me that flash drive, I knew the ground beneath Claudia Mercer's empire had finally cracked. But cracks can be dangerous. They can swallow you if you step wrong. I drove to the edge of town, parking beneath an overpass where cell signals scattered. The air was thick with rain and diesel fumes, the kind of smell that clings to truth when it's about to come out. When I plugged the drive into my laptop, the screen flickered, lines of encrypted text filling the dark. Tessa wasn't exaggerating. These weren't ordinary files. They were internal messages, encrypted logs, and voice clips. Claudia had turned HOA infrastructure into her own surveillance grid. And then I heard it, a recording, her voice, cold, deliberate. If we let one exception through the gate, the entire policy collapses. I don't care who's waiting. Rules are rules. The officer of rules said it the night my father called for help. She'd been listening, watching, deciding, while he lay dying on the porch. My hands trembled, but I kept scrolling. The log timestamps matched the override record from the audit file. That was enough to burn her whole operation to ash. But evidence meant nothing if it didn't reach the right hands. And now, the clipboard queen would know exactly who took it. By morning, I had a plan. The governor's task force was already investigating municipal negligence after recent state-level emergencies. If I tied her interference to a failure in emergency infrastructure, it wouldn't just be an HOA scandal. It'd be a state case. I needed a safe line of contact, someone who couldn't be bought. That's when I remembered Captain Dana Ruiz, my old colleague from the State Emergency Response Unit. She owed me one. When I called her, she answered on the first ring. Eric, it's been years. I know, but I've got something you need to see. It's about a homeowner association cutting off emergency access. Her tone shifted instantly. You're not talking about a simple zoning issue, are you? No, I said. I'm talking about a woman who killed my father with bureaucracy. A pause. Bring me everything, quietly. I exhaled. You'll have it by tonight. After the call, I noticed headlights moving outside my house. Slow, deliberate, circling. The enforcer in crimson wasn't sleeping either. Hours later, I found my front door slightly ajar. No sign of forced entry, just the faint scent of her perfume, expensive and precise. like the kind of power that believes it's untouchable. On the table lay a single item, a red envelope with the HOA seal. Inside, one sentence typed in bold. Some rules are written in blood. The tyrant in heels was playing psychological warfare now. I burned the letter in the sink, watching the paper curl into black flakes. Fear was her language, but silence was mine. That evening, I met Captain Ruiz at a diner off the interstate. Neon lights hummed against the window, and the air smelled of cheap coffee and wet asphalt. She scrolled through the files, jaw tightening. She actually disabled the emergency override system? Yes, I said. And she did it while on a board salary, funded by every homeowner she endangered. Ruiz looked up, her eyes sharp. We can open an inquiry under state negligence. If this links to the infrastructure chain, the governor himself will see it. Outside, thunder rumbled again, fitting, considering what was coming. But just as I slid the flash drive across the table, I caught movement through the window. A woman in a red coat, watching from a black SUV. Even from that distance, I'd know that posture anywhere. The clipboard queen was one step ahead. She followed you, Ruiz said quietly. I didn't turn my head. Let her watch. This is the part where she realizes she's no longer in control. If you've ever stood face to face with someone who built an empire on fear, you know the moment they finally see it crumble. It's not loud. It's quiet, almost reverent. That's how it began for Claudia Mercer. Not with a bang, but with the faint click of a flash drive sliding into a state investigator's hands. By the next morning, Claudia Mercer's kingdom was starting to shake. News had begun to leak, quietly, like cracks forming in a dam. I could feel it. The silence in the neighborhood wasn't compliance anymore. It was tension. Fear. People had stopped looking at me like a problem and started glancing over their shoulders when her name came up. The board chair sensed it too. I could tell by the sudden flood of official bulletins cluttering everyone's inboxes, each message wrapped in bureaucratic language, each one trying to reclaim her authority. Our community remains secure and compliant. Any malicious rumors or slanderous claims will be addressed through legal counsel. Translation: she was panicking. That morning, Tessa called from a blocked number. She's losing it, Eric. Claudia's been in the office since dawn. She ordered IT to purge all backups and surveillance feeds. Did they comply? I asked. No, Tessa whispered. One of the tech guys hesitated, said the governor's team already subpoenaed the data. She went ballistic, started screaming that someone on the board had betrayed her. The enforcer in crimson was unraveling. Stay away from the office, I warned. She's dangerous when cornered. I can't, Tessa said. She's calling an emergency homeowner assembly this evening. Mandatory attendance. She's planning to turn everyone against you before the state investigation hits. Of course she was. The clipboard queen didn't fight in courtrooms. She fought in living rooms and cul-de-sacs, where gossip traveled faster than truth. That night, the parking lot outside the HOA hall was packed. Porch lights from every home bled into the darkness as residents shuffled nervously toward the building. It felt less like a meeting and more like a trial. Inside, Claudia stood at the front podium, her crimson blazer glowing under the fluorescent lights. She didn't look human. She looked sculpted, weaponized. Good evening, neighbors, she began, her voice smooth and poisoned with authority. Tonight, we address a grave issue, a smear campaign threatening the stability of our community. She gestured toward me, her eyes glinting. Mr. Ward has made false accusations regarding this board's integrity and our emergency protocols. Let me remind you, this association has saved lives, not endangered them. A few people nodded, a few didn't. I waited until her voice hit its practiced rhythm, controlled, persuasive, before I stood. Saved lives? Tell that to my father, Claudia. Tell him about the night he waited for help while your policies shut the gate. The crowd went silent. The tyrant in heels leaned on the podium, her lips curling. Your father's tragedy was unfortunate, but rules exist for a reason. Exceptions keep people alive, I cut in. You disabled a state emergency channel. You knew the risk. You heard his call. A tremor flashed across her expression, quick but visible, a tell only someone studying her would notice. From the back, Tessa stepped forward, clutching a manila envelope. She's lying, she said. I have the logs, every override, every order, signed by her. Gasps rippled through the room. The officer of rules turned sharply, her voice cracking for the first time. "Tessa, you're in violation of confidentiality. You'll be terminated immediately." "No, Claudia," Tessa said, her voice trembling but firm. "You're the one getting terminated." Security officers rushed toward her, but I intercepted, stepping between them. "Touch her, and every homeowner here sees the video I just sent to the governor's office." The clipboard queen froze. In that moment, the power balance flipped. Every stare in the room turned on her. The neighbors she'd ruled with fines and fear began whispering, not to her, but to each other. Someone shouted, "She ignored a man's death!" Another yelled, "You abused your power!" The board chair tried to shout over them, but her voice drowned beneath the noise. I looked at her, this woman who'd built an empire out of red tape and fear, and felt no satisfaction, only finality. "You always said rules keep order," I said quietly. "But maybe order without compassion isn't worth keeping." The enforcer in crimson stared back at me, her composure finally gone. Outside, I heard the distant wail of sirens. Not for me this time, for her. By dawn, word of the confrontation had spread through every mailbox and porch light in Maplewood Crossing. Claudia Mercer had built her reputation on control, but now control was slipping through her manicured fingers. I barely slept. Every message from neighbors buzzed with cautious support. "We saw the footage. You did the right thing. It's time she answers for this." But I knew better than to celebrate early. The board chair wasn't finished, not yet. When I opened my front door that morning, a black SUV idled at the curb. Inside sat two state investigators in dark suits. One of them, Ruiz's contact, handed me a warrant. "Mr. Ward, we've been authorized to seize the HOA's records. You're listed as the complainant and material witness." "Then let's make it official," I said. By the time we arrived at the HOA office, the place looked gutted. Cabinets were half empty, monitors unplugged, files missing. It was the kind of panic only guilt could produce. The clipboard queen had clearly spent the night trying to erase herself. An investigator brushed a gloved hand across an empty drawer. "She wiped this whole system clean." "She always keeps a backup," I said. "At her home office. She's too meticulous to destroy everything." The officer raised an eyebrow. "You're certain?" "Positive," I said. "She's predictable. She hides behind her own order." We split into two teams. Ruiz and her unit headed for Claudia's gated property, while I stayed behind with the IT technician to oversee the digital sweep. Hours dragged on. Rain hammered the windows. Every creak in the building sounded like footsteps that shouldn't be there. Then, footsteps that were. The enforcer in crimson stepped into the doorway, flanked by a lawyer in a charcoal suit. Her red coat glistened with rain, her eyes sharp enough to cut glass. "Still trespassing, Mr. Ward?" she said coolly. "I'd call this obsession if it weren't so sad." "You're under state investigation," I replied. "I'd call that justice." She smiled faintly. "Justice? You mean slander in uniform." Her attorney stepped forward, waving a folder. "My client has filed an injunction against unlawful seizure. Unless you have a direct order signed by the governor himself, this is harassment." Ruiz appeared from behind, flashing her badge. "Then call it harassment. The governor just signed it 10 minutes ago." For the first time, the tyrant in heels faltered, just slightly, but enough to notice. Ruiz's team entered, moving swiftly through the office. Claudia's lawyer began protesting, but his voice drowned under the shuffle of evidence tags and camera flashes. I caught her gaze across the room. "You had every chance to stop this," I said. "You just couldn't live without control." Her voice dropped low. "Control is what keeps chaos from winning." "Control killed. My father," I said. "Chaos didn't." She turned away, silent, as agents opened her private cabinet. Inside, they found what I'd predicted, a red binder labeled Emergency Protocol Overrides. Every page dated, signed, and logged by her hand. The officer of rules closed her eyes as they carried it out. Ruiz leaned toward me. "You were right. This will hold in court." But something in me stayed uneasy. The way Claudia stood, still, collected, her fingers tapping faintly against her side. It wasn't surrender. It was calculation. "She's not finished," I murmured. Ruiz frowned. "What makes you think that?" Because she's not fighting, she's waiting. And I was right. That evening, a new press release hit every homeowner's inbox. Pending board review, Ms. Mercer has temporarily stepped down as HOA chair. Effective immediately, interim control will transfer to the vice chair, pending community re-election. It looked like resignation, but I could read between the lines. This wasn't retreat. It was repositioning. The clipboard queen wasn't out of moves. That night, as I stood on my porch watching the rain pool around the steps where my father once sat, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number, a text. You think you've won. But the rules still belong to me. No signature, no doubt. The storm wasn't over. It had just changed shape. The following evening, the community center was standing room only. Every seat packed, every whisper sharp with anticipation. Word had spread that Claudia Mercer herself had called for a special emergency hearing. When tyrants choose public stages, it's never for confession. It's for performance. I stood near the back wall, hands folded, watching as the board chair took the podium. Her crimson blazer gleamed under the lights like fresh blood under glass. She didn't look beaten, she looked rehearsed. "Neighbors," she began, her voice smooth and deliberate. "We've all suffered from misinformation. Tonight, I'll restore order." She scanned the crowd, eyes finding mine with a faint smile. That smile had always been her weapon, controlled, polite, perfectly poisonous. "Rumors have spread about emergency interference and tragedy," she continued. "But I assure you, no such interference ever occurred. In fact, Mr. Ward has exploited his own father's passing to discredit this association." The words hit the room like static. Some gasped, others shifted uneasily. I felt every gaze turned toward me, some doubtful, some angry, all heavy. The enforcer in crimson adjusted her pearl earring and gestured toward a large monitor. "To prove my transparency, I'll play the last recorded system log. You'll see no tampering, no wrongdoing, only professionalism." I knew that recording. I'd heard it myself, the one she'd scrubbed. But I also knew what Ruiz's team had uncovered earlier that day. They'd found the original audio beneath layers of encryption, its metadata intact. Ruiz stood at the side of the room, nodding subtly. My signal. "Go ahead," I said, voice steady. "Play it." The monitor flickered, the room falling into tense silence. Static hissed, then a voice, familiar, shaky. My father's voice. "This is James Ward at 47 Willow Bend. My chest. Please, someone send help." Then another voice, hers, calm, cold. "Mr. Ward, emergency access is suspended during non-compliant hours. Regulations are clear. Please contact your private care provider." The clipboard queen froze. Her perfect smile fractured. Gasps erupted through the crowd. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. A man cursed under his breath. Claudia lunged for the laptop, but Ruiz's agents moved faster. One officer stepped between her and the podium, raising a hand. "That file was recovered under state authorization," he announced. "Tampering will be considered obstruction." For the first time, the tyrant in heels looked smaller than the podium she stood behind. Her eyes darted toward me, filled with a venomous kind of disbelief, like she couldn't fathom losing control in her own kingdom. I stepped forward, every eye following. "You silenced a dying man for the sake of a rulebook," I said. "You called it order. I call it murder by policy." The crowd erupted again, this time not in gasps, but in fury. Homeowners shouted, fists pounded the tables. People demanded her resignation. Ruiz stepped up beside me, addressing the room. "Effective immediately, the state has suspended Ms. Mercer from all administrative duties pending criminal investigation." The officer of rules laughed suddenly, a brittle, hollow sound. "You think this will matter? You think the governor cares about one dead man?" Ruiz didn't flinch. "He does when it's recorded, and it is." Security moved in. Claudia's red blazer flashed as she struggled, muttering something about lawful authority and community standards. But her voice was drowned beneath the noise. As they escorted her out, I caught one last look, her head high, her expression somewhere between fury and disbelief. Even in defeat, the enforcer in crimson refused to bow. The room quieted. Ruiz turned to me. "It's done," she said softly. But it didn't feel done. The air still buzzed with everything she'd built, the fear, the control, the illusion of order. I looked around at the faces of my neighbors, ordinary people who'd lived under her shadow for years. Tonight, they weren't afraid. "If you've ever been silenced by someone like her," I said to the crowd, "remember this moment. This is what it looks like when the truth wins. Not because it's loud, but because it doesn't back down." The audience stood. Applause began slow, uncertain, then grew. Clapping that shook the walls, clapping that drowned out the last echoes of her reign. And somewhere, deep down, I knew my father finally had his answer. When the applause finally faded, I stepped outside into the night air. It was cool, almost too still, as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Claudia Mercer was gone, taken away in the same black SUV she once used to patrol driveways and ticket residents for visual non-compliance. For the first time in months, the cul-de-sac felt unchained. But peace doesn't arrive quietly. It lingers, testing if you truly deserve it. Reporters lined the street, their lights harsh and demanding. The board chair's downfall had become a headline. Local HOA under state investigation after tragic emergency neglect. Cameras pointed at me as questions flew. "Mr. Ward, did you plan this exposure? Was your father's case politically motivated? Do you think the governor acted fast enough?" I didn't answer. Not yet. The truth wasn't about politics. It was about a man who died waiting for compassion in a community obsessed with control. Behind me, the HOA building loomed, a relic of her rule. Red light from a nearby cruiser flickered across the glass doors, painting them the same shade as the enforcer in Crimson's blazer. The irony wasn't lost on me. Her color still bled into everything she touched. Tessa walked up beside me, arms crossed. Her expression was a strange mix of relief and grief. "You did it, Eric," she said softly. "She's done." I shook my head. "No, we did. You risked your job to expose her. Ruiz fought through bureaucratic hell to get the warrant, and my father—" I paused, my throat tightening. He paid the price for her rules. The clipboard queen had always hidden behind policies and procedure, convinced that order justified cruelty. But tonight proved something she never understood. Rules mean nothing without humanity. A door creaked open behind us. Ruiz stepped out, her notepad tucked under her arm. "State prosecutors confirmed, charges are being filed, negligence, obstruction, falsification of records. It's airtight." Tessa exhaled. "Good. Maybe this place can finally heal." Ruiz nodded, but looked at me differently. "There's one more thing. The governor wants to meet you personally. He said your father's story might change emergency access laws statewide." I looked up at the streetlight, its glow soft against the dark. My father's voice echoed in my mind, the way he used to say, "Son, a man's legacy isn't what he builds, it's what he protects." The tyrant in heels thought she was protecting order, but order without empathy is just another kind of chaos. As I walked toward my truck, I noticed something. A small folded notice had been taped to my windshield, a remnant of the HOA's old ways. The paper was wrinkled, the ink smeared, but I could still read the heading, "Violation, Unauthorized Flag Display." I laughed quietly under my breath. Not anymore. I tore it in half and let the pieces scatter across the wet asphalt. In the reflection of my truck window, I caught one last glimpse of the officer of rule's empty office across the street. Her desk light was still on, an unintentional memorial to everything she'd lost trying to control others. Tessa leaned against the door beside me. "You going to take the governor's meeting?" "Yeah," I said. "But first, I'm going home. My dad's porch still needs fixing." She smiled faintly. "He'd be proud, you know." "I hope so." I looked at the neighborhood one last time. The fences, the mailboxes, the manicured lawns, they all looked the same. But something fundamental had shifted. People were outside, talking quietly, no longer glancing toward the HOA office in fear. This place had been built on silence. Now it was learning how to breathe again. I turned toward the camera crew still waiting at the curb. "If you've ever been silenced by someone who used power as punishment," I said, my voice steady but heavy with meaning, "remember this. Truth isn't loud. It just refuses to die." And with that, I walked away from the lights, from the noise, from her shadow. If you believe truth outlives tyranny, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. And share your story in the comments. Justice wasn't loud tonight. It was quiet, final, and for once, peace didn't need permission to exist. If you've ever been silenced by someone who used power as punishment, I said, my voice steady but heavy with meaning, remember this. Truth isn't loud. It just refuses to die. And with that, I walked away from the lights, from the noise, from her shadow. If you believe truth outlives tyranny, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. And share your story in the comments. Justice wasn't loud tonight. It was quiet, final, and for once, peace didn't need permission to exist.